Welcome to Renegade Thinkers Unite, a show that will help you transform your marketing from mere messaging to programs that break the rules and make a difference. Join the movement today and learn non-traditional techniques that give you an edge. Now, here's your Chief Marketing Renegade, Drew Nizer.
My guest today is Meredith Kopit Levien, Chief Revenue Officer at the New York Times. Meredith joined the Times in 2013 after successful runs driving revenue at both Forbes and The Atlantic. She is well known in the industry as an innovator, a champion of native advertising, and helping traditional print publishers develop and nurture new revenue streams. We're going to be talking about media, content marketing, and the New York Times' most recent iterations of its timely Truth campaign. Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
This is really funny. Your Twitter bio says, faster through airports than anyone I've met. Can you reveal your secret?
Sure. Well, some of it is being on the road a lot, but mostly it is getting there with just enough time to make the flight, so I don't have a choice.
Okay, so a little just-in-time delivery. All right. Well, you're the first CRO I've interviewed, and I've talked to many CMOs. So what in your mind is the biggest distinction between a CMO and a CRO?
Yeah, well, good question. I'm going to answer it technically first, and then I'll give you a little bit more philosophy. Technically, we don't have a CMO. We have two leaders who look after the whole of the marketing function at the New York Times, who both work for me. One is a head of brand. The other is essentially the head of our subscriptions business, and we call him the head of consumer marketing. So there is no CMO officially here, but if there was one, that person would be on my team. We have sort of two halves of one. My more philosophical answer is, I think in the world that we live in now, the world that's been completely disrupted by the digital age, marketing itself is changing, and it's gotten much closer to it's become much more intrinsic to everything that the company does. And so who knows what will happen to the title over time.
It's really true. And I think one of the reasons that CMOs have not necessarily extended their stay in the job is they keep getting stuff added to their jobs, which makes it complicated. Though some are in charge of user experience, some get customer service. And then, of course, there are those that, like yourself, who are both in charge of sales and marketing. So in an interview, you said, we are generally obsessed with tilting toward innovation. This was in reference to the Times' participation in Facebook instant articles. To me, that makes you a renegade and a renegade thinker, which is why you're on the show. And looking back at the last 4 years of the New York Times, what would you say is the most innovative thing that you've hatched? And if there's more than one, we can talk about all of them, but let's start with one of them.
I think the most innovative thing we've had to do is actually in our ad business, really change what business we're in, or expand the idea of what business we could be in. So in the past, marketers have bought audience and adjacency from us. So they want to reach our audience or be next to our content because of what that content does for their brand. And so much of our work now is also driven by what goes into the space that they buy from us. So we launched T-Brand Studio initially to be really effective at making branded content, and it has morphed into a whole enterprise that can essentially serve any need a marketer has around strategizing for making, distributing, or measuring content. And we really believed that there, and we've seen it time and again, there is white space in the market. Who should decide, who should help a marketer decide what are the stories that are going to engage people best? What are the stories that are going to surprise them or interest them most? And what are the formats by which those stories will be most engaging? And that's what the New York Times as a brand does for a living every day. So who better than us as an organization and a brand to help marketers do that?
So one of the things that occurs to me is that you've got this new service in-house, and you had to get the word out. How did people find out about T-Brand?
Yeah, well, I will say, so, you credit us for tilting toward innovation. We were relatively late as a company in launching Content Studio. But by the time T-Brand launched, we were probably, everybody else had already done it. But we did something different. We said, rather than put up a shingle and say we make content in the spirit of the newsroom's content, we're actually going to hire all the makers to do it. And we're going to develop all the capabilities in-house to deliver that content with the same quality differential that the New York Times delivers its journalism versus all the other journalism out there that you can experience. And so honestly, we got the word out by making content that people noticed and paid attention to. The piece that probably put us on the map, and it was like, the sixth or seventh piece of branded content we launched, and we're now into the, many hundreds. We made a multimedia mini documentary for Netflix when the second season of Orange is the New Black launched. And the piece was so good and so like journalism, yet so thoroughly labeled as coming from Netflix, and so different in its format, and so topical, so on interest that the world stopped and took notice. And so I would say it wasn't that we marketed ourselves. It was that we made really, really great content that got a lot of social attention, and that made people say, we can do branded content differently. And if we want to do it differently, we should do it with the New York Times and T-Brand Studio.
So bringing this service in-house means a whole new set of expertise. I mean, you guys know how to do news better than anybody, right? My opinion. Right. And so what were some of the challenges that you had to overcome to build the studio?
Yeah. Great question. So, I say all the time of our work in journalism that comes from our newsroom, it takes an extraordinary amount of commitment, expertise, and resources. And I would say the same thing about making great content for marketers. So we had to commit to spending the money to hire really high quality talent. We got a lot of that talent from hardcore journalism. The first major hire we made was someone who'd been an editor at Business Week, and had a great reputation, and then had gone to The Economist and run the Economist intelligence unit. So we're going to spend real money on talent, and we're going to create an environment where that talent can really flourish creatively. So one of the early things that happen often in branded content is we would get briefed in. Client would say, this is the piece of content I want to make. And our creative team would say, I don't think that's a very interesting story, or I don't think that's the best format in which to tell that story. I know you're attached to an infographic, but we don't think the data lends itself to an interesting infographic, and so on. And we resourced the studio in a way where we said, you guys are makers, you're making real content that's meant to have real audience that engages time and again. And we're going to let you push back and say, we don't want to do this project, or we're going to redirect the client, even if it means we're going to lose the business. We didn't do that in every instance, but we did it in enough instances, and we hired enough really great, really creative people whereby we were able to get to a level of consistent quality such that people wanted to come work here and people wanted to keep doing business with us.
So does that become an asset that your salespeople can use, that then go and say, it's not just about being, spending some money and buying some display. It's really, if you really want the most out of a partnership with the Times, this is what you should be doing.
I always say, I gave a speech like 5 or 6 years ago. I think it was called Kill the RFP. And the notion was that the idea of these kind of quarterly digital, $250,000 RFPs would go away, that nobody was going to be building big ideas kind of at that level, and that all that business would sort of give way to programmatic. And what marketers would really want were big ideas that touched culture, ideas that actually made the world think about them in a deeper way or a different way. And to the extent that branded content would play a role in that, you needed brain power and creative power at a quality level that aspired to be like the Times newsroom. And that has all changed. When we get briefed by a client now, we are much more upstream in the process. So we are often brought in by an agency or with an agency. We are in much more direct dialogue with clients. We are doing incredibly upstream work on what stories should a marketer be telling? What are the stories they've already got, and how might those stories best reach and engage an audience from a format perspective? So it used to be we'd get an RFP because someone wanted to make content in a particular way on a particular topic, and now we go all the way back to what should the content strategy be? What are the content assets the marketer already has? Where does the marketer really have deep purpose and principle and expertise? And how then do you build a content strategy? So we're just much more upstream.
As a marketer is trying to wrap their heads around working with the New York Times on something like this, how do you guys? It's a big brand, because small brands are less likely to engage with you. How are they finding a unique thing to do with the Times, but still have it be sort of in campaign?
That's a great question. I think I'll answer it two ways. We really have begun to think and talk about the Times as a proposition to marketers, as an ad business, as this broad creative launchpad. And being a creative launchpad means a marketer can come to us and we can co-create a body of content that's consistent thematically. Everything we do is consistent thematically with what a marketer wants to do, but we can co-create a body of original content in the spirit of how that marketer has defined its purpose and its broader communication strategy to the world. And we are staffed to embed very deeply now with a marketer's team. We can embed people with journalistic backgrounds and deep creative backgrounds who are used to doing always on content that gets social attention. We embed with a marketer and we can help them figure out what is the right content to make that dovetails with their broader comms or advertising or marketing strategy. So that's one way to think about it. The other way to think about it is Creative Launchpad. What should a marketer be doing alongside things we're already doing in the newsroom, because we believe global interest is in a particular place and there's a new way to cover a topic, and there are a lot of things we can do to help a marketer draft off of that.
As we wrap up this section, I mean, you're now in the business of creating not just a place for marketers to advertise, but you're in the business of creating the marketing for the marketers. I imagine you've learned a couple of things that really matter, that seem to be ones that just marketers were overlooking before they came to you.
So interesting. We've been out there talking about this for, I've been talking about branded content for a long time, probably half a dozen years. And T-Brand Studio has been at this now for almost 4 years. And the lessons haven't changed. In the micro, they change. Like, what are the formats that really engage people? That changes. But some of the big lessons haven't changed. One of the early things we used to say to marketers often, you're not the plot, you're the subplot. So what is the way the marketer attaches to a real consumer problem? It's the consumer problem that you should be building the content around, not the solution, right? It's the problem where you can shed light in a new way or surprise or interest people. So that's one of the lessons. Another lesson we've learned, and this is probably the biggest one, and this one has changed over time. Early on at Forbes, when we were launching Forbes Ad Voice and then Brand Voice, we used to say to a marketer, and we meant it, publish frequently. Publishing frequently is how you build an engaged audience. Now I would say we're living in a moment where content is so ubiquitous and it's so everywhere and ambient in every moment of our lives. To break through, it's not that you have to do more, it's that you have to do something really, really great. So we often find ourselves bringing the work back to, let's focus on one really, really big, extraordinary thing, and do that in a serialized way, or do that once with some appendages versus some kind of ongoing thing just for the sake of being out there publishing a lot. And I think you're going to see more and more, great over often defining branded content.
All right. Well, that's a great place for us to take a break. And when we come back, we're going to go from talking about using the New York Times as a marketing vehicle to talking about how the Times is marketing itself. So we'll be right back.
You've been listening to another great interview on Renegade Thinkers Unite with Drew Neiser. But the value doesn't end there. As a listener, you can download a free ebook from Drew, Renegade Thinkers, interviews with 11 trailblazing CMOs any business can learn from. top marketing thought leaders and proven executives from Time Warner, American Express, and Chico's, and others. Get your free copy at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook. For listeners only at renegadethinkersunite.com/ebook.
We're back, and my guest is Meredith Kopit Levien, Chief Revenue Officer at the New York Times. Now, over the years, this is me, and I could be wrong, but I remember New York Times sort of as taxi top advertising, and it just said, the New York Times with an amazing logo and all the news it's fit to print. I can't really remember an ad campaign for the Times. And so, but now there's the Truth Campaign, and that, to me, rocked the world quite a bit. Take us behind the scenes about the development of this work and what inspired you to really to launch this campaign.
Thanks for that question. It's my favorite one to answer of late. We made a decision probably 18 months ago that we needed to start thinking about the New York Times as a consumer brand and take its power as a brand much more seriously. And the staffing decision we made around that was to bring somebody in to run brand as a direct report to me. So we hired a guy a year ago called David Rubin, who is the head of brand. He works as a peer to our brilliant head of consumer marketing, Clay Fisher. And so it started with that. So bring in talent with deep brand thinking, brand planning, brand execution experience. And then this amazing thing happened. So there was always, for the last year and a half, there was always an intent to face the world more as brands do. And behind that intent was a sense that we are a world-class news brand, which to me means we define the category that we're in and we deliver the work that we do and its products very, very well. There was always a sense that we had this opportunity to also be a world-class consumer brand and begin to behave more like a world-class consumer brand.
First, I just want to make the point, yes, you have to bring in the expertise, and that I'm just going to put a big exclamation point on that. So, okay, so you bring in this individual, right? And then let's talk about the strategy, development, and to get there.
So we spent quite a bit of time on core brand principle definition. And that was something that was, done across the top of the house with deep involvement from the newsroom at the Times. And we arrived at a very simple brand statement, which is essentially that the New York Times helps people understand the world. And we arrived at a set of principles around which we would operate so that, I always say brand starts with how do employees think of themselves as members of this community and what is it that they're doing in the world? So that was the first part of the exercise. And then as we're doing that and as we are beginning to really think like a brand thinks, what is our narrative? What are the messages? How do those messages look? Where's the consistency? This stunning thing happened in the world. We had a presidential election. We had an extraordinary moment in terms of news cycle. We saw our traffic and engagement go to a place, beyond anybody's expectation. And then the news became the news. And so you asked, why did the Truth Campaign happen? The Truth Campaign, I imagine we would have done a brand campaign had the news not become the news. But I think what that brand campaign was, which was really about the process by which the world arrives at truth and the role that journalism plays in that. I'm not sure that would have happened had the news not become the news. The news became the news, and we launched the Truth Campaign. We did that with Droga, which we feel very proud of the work that they've done and very lucky to work with them. First phase of the campaign, we broke the campaign the weekend of the Oscars. First phase of the campaign essentially was meant to remind the world of the role that journalism plays in speaking truth to power, holding power to account. and how important it is to have journalism and high quality journalism as a partner on any individual's path to finding truth. The second phase of the campaign, which we've launched just a few weeks ago, is a short film series that we've done with Darren Aronofsky, the incredible filmmaker, which is more about the craft of journalism at the New York Times. It's about the commitment and the resources and the expertise that it takes to cover the world and to find the truth, and to do so in a way that people can believe in and trust, and to do so in a way that gives people a tool to help make sense of what's going on around them. And you can expect that we'll continue the campaign on to other phases.
As I break it down, I see the launch as sort of the why of the New York Times. And we live in an era where truth is more important than ever. And then you sort of, with the film series, you've moved to the how. Exactly. You've moved to the how. Exactly. And that, I think, as someone who absolutely insists that he is not a journalist, because I don't have that craft. And watching that, I really appreciate, just the risks that some of these journalists take to bring the news. I thought that was pretty amazing to share. How did you choose the stories that you decided to share in this campaign?
Yeah, that's a great question. We were looking for representative work. So how do we convey the importance of boots on the ground journalism? So putting people in the right places, often places that are dangerous, places that are hard to get to, places that are hard to be in. And then not just putting people there, but having a system and a structure to support that, and making sure the people who are there have the expertise and the judgment to understand, and candidly, the bravery to track down those facts. So if you think about the spots we've done, one of them, which is you can find on our site, is about the commitment the Times made during the Ebola crisis and some of the work that happened during the Ebola crisis. All of the work, all of the spots so far, all but one, have been from photojournalists, because it was a great way to depict the amount of work that goes into making people aware of what's going on. We've just broken a spot featuring a photojournalist named Meredith Kopit, who is based in Venezuela, who is chronicling what life is like for what was the middle and upper middle class in Venezuela. And it's a spot where she talks about the diseases that people are getting from gold mining or mineral mining in Venezuela. And these people are doctors and lawyers. And you get such a clear sense of the story she's tracking down. So we really looked for stories where we could show the work. And we had this sort of added layer of complication. To show the work, we needed photos. So we went with photojournalists. We've won, 5 or 6 Pulitzers for photojournalism. So it's a good place to start and rich terrain to choose from. But we're going to keep showing the work, and we'll show different kinds of work.
You mentioned on Twitter that the New York Times campaign is about creating a long-term view, that what we, as in the New York Times, do is different. How are you measuring the effectiveness of this campaign?
We had sort of 3 objectives for the work. The first was, did we get people talking about why journalism matters and how journalism is made? And I think both parts of the campaign are accomplishing that based on what we see in terms of social media and sentiment and response to the campaign. The second thing we're trying to do is, candidly, to change a category. So if you think about it, there are millions and millions and millions of people in this country, for example, and the campaign right now is a domestic campaign. There are millions and millions of people who pay for entertainment, pay for music. There are only, as best as we can tell, somewhere in the neighborhood of 10 million people who actually pay for news. So ultimately, a big reason we're doing this campaign is to remind people that if it takes commitment, resources, and expertise to deliver journalism that can be your partner in finding the truth, that's got to be paid for in some way. And we think in large part, it's subscriptions. And in our business, it's subscriptions and advertising. So the campaign is really meant to bolster the public's understanding of that. And we've just had earnings, and we've just talked about the first quarter in terms of subscription growth. And it was a record quarter at the Times in terms of new subscribers. So I would say from that standpoint, the campaign is working.
So you've driven many subscribers to the campaign. One of the things I would also think that the campaign had is that it would remind advertisers of the importance of the New York Times and the value of being in the New York Times, because if they want to be a brand associated with truth, wouldn't they want to be in the New York Times?
I think that's exactly right. And I will tell you, it was not a stated reason for doing the campaign, but it's certainly, again, we've just put up a very good quarter for digital advertising as well in the first quarter. And we've done that in a moment when the news is the news. The fake news crisis was a big part of the news. And I think marketers are generally looking for brand safe environments. I also think that marketers get a lot of credit for being associated with things that matter, with things that are well done, with things that are important. And I think our campaign is helping remind people that associating with the New York Times is all of those things.
I definitely think that's true, and it makes you topical, and it makes you a little bit cooler, and I think that's an important part of all of this. So as we wrap up, I mean, we've talked about content creation for brands, we've talked about marketing for your brand. What's some of the toughest lessons that you've learned in the last couple of years that other marketers might benefit from hearing?
Yeah, I'll go back to my tilting to innovation point. We are running a, $1 billion+ legacy business. And we are running a fast growing digital business. And we're doing both of those things on the backs of the same brand, and the same value proposition. And you find yourself in a position over and over again, to rationalize resources and make choices. And I would say it is very hard to always tilt to the future business, very hard, but we have to keep forcing ourselves to do it. And we are. The other thing I would say when you're running a legacy business, and a new business, there's a lot of complexity. And for us, setting up systems and structures to deal with complexity is one thing, and it's a hard thing. Doing it at the speed the market is moving is really, really hard. And we're doing it. We're forcing ourselves to do it. But I think it makes for, I think on our team's part, you feel whiplash sometimes with how fast things are changing. I think, in both our ad business and in our subscription business, in many cases, we've gotten out ahead strategically and had to play catch up operationally. I think our team would say that. I would always choose I would choose the former over the latter. You want to be out ahead strategically, but there's an operational heave to keep up with that. And we still have a lot of work to do to keep up with that. And I would say to other marketers, if you know where you're going and everybody's clear on the direction and everybody's clear that the pace can be no slower than the pace of changing consumption, then your team sort of lives with how hard it is operationally to do.
I'm going to attempt to summarize some of the things that I learned in this thing. And when we first started with the content studio, and we talked a lot about that as a point of innovation, and that just reminding particularly software companies the need to necessarily to offer the service in order to use your product as well as you can. I love the expression telling brands you're not the plot, you're the subplot. We often put it a different way. We say you're not the hero, you're the sage. You're in the story. You're just not, the customer, or somebody else is the hero. So that was really interesting in the learnings that you got out of the creating. And one of the advantages of having a service like this in-house is you get to test your product too, and maybe even break it. So that's a pretty cool thing for software companies to be thinking about, is how you add the service component to your product. Then we talked about the consumer brand and building a brand. And the first thing was bringing the expertise in-house because it wasn't there. The second thing was defining a simple purpose. And I always say simple is really hard. But what you said was simple. And that's key. And so obviously a lot of thought went into that. Number three, and this has come up a lot on the program, but you start a brand in-house, not externally. And so getting the employees on board, particularly as we're talking about a legacy brand that's trying to go from print to digital. But I think any big company has legacy products, and they all do. They have to constantly be competing with themselves. Not being afraid to go to an external resource. In your case, you went to Droga, and then so I think that's just a perfect place to wrap up. Not to mention, by elevating, your brand and talking about your brand in a certain way, there's added benefits. While you were hoping to get more subscribers, there was a benefit that it enhanced the value of the brand for advertisers. So thank you for being on the show.
Can I make two last comments? I think two other very big lessons we've learned as a legacy brand. One is you can be just successful enough to not change fast enough. And I think we suffered from that for a long time at the New York Times. You have to believe that your whole business could be compromised at any moment. And that goes with my second lesson, which I call bet the model, not the mission. So we are willing to change the business model to the fullest extent you could imagine, again and again and again, to match consumption. The only thing that's precious to us is the core mission of the Times, which is what the brand campaign is about. And I will say, both in the consumer business and in the ad business, we're going to keep changing that model. We're going to be ruthless about it, but we're going to do it without tinkering with the mission.
What a wonderful way to wrap it up. And so agility, folks, agility.
This has been Renegade Thinkers Unite. Just go to renegadethinkersunite.com for more and subscribe to the show. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We'll talk with you next time on Renegade Thinkers Unite.